This episode is brought to you by WeatherGuard Lightning Tech. At WeatherGuard, we make wind turbine lightning protection easy. If you're a wind farm operator, stop settling for damaged turbine blades and constant downtime. Get your uptime back with our Strike Tape lightning protection system. Learn more in today's show notes or visit weatherguardwind.com/striketape.
Welcome back. I'm Alan Hall.
I'm Dan Blewett, and this is the Uptime Podcast, where we talk about wind energy, engineering, lightning protection, and ways to keep your wind turbines running. All right, welcome back to the Uptime Podcast. I'm your co-host, Dan Blewett. On today's show, we're going to talk about wind turbine technician jobs and what the outlook looks like for the future. So first, let's say hello to my co-host, Alan Hall. How are you, sir?
Hey, good, Dan. Boy, coming out post-COVID, things are looking positive. Wind turbine industry is still rolling along. Good stuff's happening.
Yeah. So obviously, with the new presidential administration here in the U.S., wind power is getting a big boost. And obviously offshore wind especially is growing really, really fast all over the world. And when you start to look at the jobs outlook, wind turbine technician is one of those really hot jobs at the moment, because obviously more and bigger wind farms are going up, and we need people with that expertise to help maintain them, service them, repair them, inspect them, all that stuff. So Alan, let's start here today with a little bit of the job and how it's evolving. So obviously, in the past, if you talked about, what does a wind turbine tech do, aside from, climbing up, through the tower up to the nacelle, doing all the ground-based checks, monitoring, inspecting all the equipment in the nacelle itself. But there's also the rope access part of it, which is really hazardous. It's a pretty interesting job because it's highly variable depending on maybe your narrow focus. Like you might be more into like the hydraulic side of it, or the electrical side, or the blade side. But that job's also going to evolve a lot. I mean, what do you see a wind turbine technician doing in the future as drones and robotics and a lot of automation starts to take place?
Yeah, I think what you're going to see is more and more automation and interfacing with computers and electronics to run the turbines. And so not only do you have to understand power electronics and sort of power distribution, transformers, those kind of things, you also need to know how to program a programmable logic controller, PLC. You need to be able to diagnose digital equipment, network lines, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of more computer technology in wind turbines than there has been in the past 20 years. It's becoming more and more of a data accumulator, and diagnostic information is going digital too. It's just, you need a really diverse set of skills and to be a wind turbine technician. It's changed a lot.
Well, and one of the common Google searches is, do you need a college degree to be a wind turbine tech? What kind of education do you need? So currently you don't need a college degree, but you do need a certificate. So you have to go to technical school or community college or one of these great programs that's, training you, because this is obviously not an easy job.
Right.
But do you see the educational requirements going up or just changing? Or, obviously they're going to evolve because, like you said, there's going to be a lot more technical skills, not just like the working on with your hands kind of skills. And it'll always be a pretty hands-on job, which is, honestly, I think, great in this time of everything's, a screen. But there's going to be more automation. There's going to be more, like you said, data mining and analytics stuff. And of course, there's lots of different, segments and lots of different jobs in the wind energy market. But do you feel like those certificate programs are going to get more rigorous? Do you feel like a degree program might be possible in the future? Where do you see, this job go as far as education wise?
Well, I think the specific job training is going to still exist. You're going to still need those certifications to get around wind turbines. Just from an insurance standpoint, you need to have competent people around wind turbines because you can't get hurt out there. So you need to know what you're doing, and you need to have some experience with it. So I think those sort of entry level and mid-level training programs are very valuable because that's a skill they can never take away from you, right? So once you gather that little skill set, you can apply it to turbines pretty much across the world. Obviously, there's differences between manufacturers, which you'll learn as you go along. But essentially, it opens the door to a whole bunch of opportunities. And the college degree thing, I think, is the one I'm not so sure makes a lot of sense. I know there are some programs that are starting to focus on wind turbines. But one of the interesting things about the wind turbine industry is the number of, at least in the U.S., it seems like there's a lot of service people, former service people that have been in the military. They get involved in it. One, because they tend to be a little more of interest type. They tend to be in pretty good shape. They've probably picked up a skill or have been trained in the military to
Not
do
afraid of hard work. Not afraid of hard work.
Yeah, right. So it's kind of like one of those really good candidates that they're sort of come in prepared, right? They're prepared for all kinds of things and to be able to adapt on the fly, which is what a lot of wind turbine technicians do. Because you're never sure what you're going to get into, and you need to be able to adapt. And I think the military service members have a unique advantage there. But you can also learn a lot of those skills going to some of the junior colleges that are around. But it is important you have some basic skill set, right? You need to have those sort of foundation pieces, and a lot of it is on the job training after that.
Yeah, well, and that's actually true what you said about veterans. The wind industry employs veterans at a rate 67% higher than the national average. So that's all 100% true. Do you see a lot of people from sort of adjacent industries, like those maintaining power equipment, like transmission lines, like the cell towers, construction, maybe going into this field?
Sure, because it just takes a set of skills that's broad in nature, right? So you need to know something about welding. You need to know something about how motors work. You need to understand how electronic cabinets are set up. You need to understand things about safety, right? There's a lot of safety involved in this, and it's safety equipment. So it sounds odd that. But because wind turbine seems like a very narrow field of work, but the skill set you need is extremely broad, right? Because you're working in cold weather, you're working in hot weather, you're working in windy weather, obviously. So the little skill set you pick up becomes sort of that tool belt of things you can do, which makes you more valuable as you go along. And that's what I found with a lot of technicians as they start off, obviously learning. That's like any entry level position is, but by the time you put 4, 5, 6 years in, boy, your skill set is really good, and those technicians are pretty smart, and a lot of them do come from things like automotive fields. They're good with their hands, and understand how mechanical things work, or they know something about electricity and motors and circuit breaker panels and that kind of thing. So they're electricians. Those are great starting skill sets to earn more money in the wind turbine industry.
Well, and how important do you feel like the physicality aspect of it is? Because if you're especially going to be working on rope access, it's a pretty physical job. It's a pretty mentally demanding job too. Being up at height that can kill you, and going through all the safety checks and being comfortable with that. I mean, it seems like you've got to have a certain, zest for adventure and a certain tolerance of risk, and a certain reverence for some of these machines that can potentially hurt you.
Yeah. Well, it tends to be a young person's game. You don't see a lot of wind turbine technicians in their 50s, definitely not in their 60s. I mean, you do occasionally see it. I saw one the other day that was, I think they're in their 70s. But there is a lot of things that involve strength, right? And a lot up and down. As you get older, you don't want to do that so much. And the technicians that have been around a long time do transition to that managerial role. Where they're overseeing a number of sites, and they're managing a bunch of people, and they're keeping track of the costs, and they're keeping track of where the equipment is, making sure all the materials are on site when they need to be. So there is a transition that naturally happens in the industry, because you need well-knowledge people managing the organization later on, as well as you need the younger people climbing up down the ropes. So there's a broad spectrum of jobs that need to be done, but some of those things can only happen. That sort of the higher paying managerial positions can only happen if you have in the service time actually working on the components. So you have to put in your time. Yeah,
and so we'll get to like salary and pay in a second, but I want to stick with the safety thing a little longer. So one of the things I find interesting is that you talk about it being a younger, more able person's game, being up in the turbines or on the turbines. But robotics companies are definitely threatening, not threatening, like, I mean, this is a positive thing, but they're jonesing to change that, where, aerial drones can do a lot of the work that used to require ropes. The crawling and cable managed robots can do a lot of the service repairs on blades. So what's interesting is it sounds like technicians who are maybe ready to transition off the really physical labor part of it, maybe getting a little older, maybe their body's just like, hey, I'd rather be on ground a little more at this point, which we all hit that point, almost just like an athlete or a military person.
Sure.
They're going to be automating some of those jobs into safer on ground, more technical roles that don't require you to be up on ropes. I mean, do you feel like that's going to be, it's definitely going to be good for aging workers in the industry because they can stay in it. They don't have to feel like, all right, I'm 55. I don't want to be on ropes anymore. It's becoming tough.
Sure.
Now I can just fly drones. I can control, a robot and do the same work that I've been doing because I've built all these skills, but now I don't have to be up there anymore, which is great.
Right.
I mean, do you see that being a continuing trend where automation is going to help people do safer jobs, but similar jobs, but from the ground?
Sure. I think there's a natural transition there anyway, especially since we have really good cameras on drones and very accurate drones and capable drones to do it. You're going to see a lot of activity happening on the ground. That's definitely going to happen. And then as we move more and more offshore, where being on a rope offshore on some of these larger turbines is definitely a little more risky. Let's put it that way, right? There's just a lot more consequences there. That you're going to see more and more sort of ship-based drones and ship-based activity that's happening where you're going to be on the water or on the ground. And one of the key parts of all this is sort of knowing what you're looking at, right? So if you have done this job for a little while, you become extremely valuable because you learn all the intricacies to the different turbine manufacturers and what you're looking for. So if you are commanding a drone, you kind of have an idea of what you should be looking for and what areas you want to focus on, because it's important to your customer to know, hey, we're looking for these kind of cracks or these kind of delaminations or this kind of rain erosion. Because we've seen so many of these turbines, we know where to go look. That's a huge, valuable piece, right? So the expertise in the industry can only make you more valuable later on.
Yeah. So going to salaries, so the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I apologize, I don't have global data for this, but in May 2020, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the median salary for a wind turbine tech was $56,230. The lowest 10% earn less than $40,000, and the highest 10% more than $83,000. Where do you see this salary point going in the next 5 or 10 years? I know we try to stay away from projections for sure, but demand for this job is going to go up. The amount of people needed to do this job is going to go up, and how does that going to affect salaries there?
Well, I think part of the salary discussion is driven by the location of where wind turbines are operating today. And the vast majority of them are in the middle of the United States or in the South, Texas, where the cost of living is just lower. Those salaries are really good salaries, but you got to put them in perspective. If you're talking about living in New York City, maybe not so good. If you're talking about living in West Texas, probably pretty good. Or living in Iowa, they're pretty good salaries, especially if you're 24 and you're making 60, 70 grand. That's a good gig. And plus, you can throw in overtime too, right, for a lot of those jobs. So I think the salary base is good, but the kicker is going to be when those offshore wind jobs start popping up, they're going to start be paying a premium. They will have to pay a premium. It's like being an oil rig worker.
Oil rigger,
There's a premium that you get paid, and a lot of those guys that I know from the engineering side were making $100K years ago because of the dangerous nature of it or the adventurous nature of it, whatever we want to call it. They were getting paid for that too. So it didn't take long for a lot of the offshore jobs to be paying a lot more, and you saw a lot of younger people, if they would be willing to be on an oil rig, or in this case, it's going to be on an offshore wind turbine, making a lot of cash.
Yeah, and of course, the piece about cost of living and where these are located, that's important. Of course, the lifestyle of a wind turbine tech is also important because, if you want to be living in a big city, like I live in downtown DC, it's probably not a realistic job for you, right? Because it would take me literally 9 hours to commute out to anywhere I want to go to find a wind turbine from here. But, do you see with this, the whole COVID pandemic's been interesting. It'll be, be interesting to see how this plays out in the future because a lot of people have left cities. They've said, why am I going to live in a city? I'm working from home anyway. Right. I can pay a third of the rent or half the rent or 2/3 the rent wherever you are in the suburbs or out in the country. So with the exodus of people from cities, which, who knows how that will continue? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Do you feel like that's going to make these jobs more realistic for a lot of people? It's like, hey, I just left this big city. I'm out here in the country. There are wind turbines around. I could work on one of these sites potentially, or I'm comfortable with this lifestyle.
Sure.
It seems like people could be more apt to living that sort of more rural, slightly more remote kind of life.
Right. Well, that's in the United States. The trouble has been is that a lot of the jobs have transitioned away from rural areas to more populated centers, leaving the smaller rural communities with really little industry left. Well, that's going to reverse itself, obviously. And you're already seeing that in a number of places, particularly Iowa and Texas and some other states where the wind turbine industry is driving smaller communities into some sort of revitalized state. And I think you're going to see the same thing when you get to the offshore wind, just because when the offshore wind, you're going to start seeing a couple of different levels happen here. You're going to see factories put near the shore. You're going to see, obviously, technicians near the shore. You're going to see shipboard people that can work on ships, manage ships, knew how to move things on and off of ships being located. So you're going to see a shift in demographics on what I would call rural areas on the coastlines of the United States. You're going to see that shift also. So former shipping centers that have lost their way over time because the global marketplace has changed. You're going to see those change also. You're going to see those areas of the country, if you have an existing dock and an existing infrastructure, you're going to see the wind turbine companies start to flock around those places, which means there's going to be new jobs, which is fantastic.
Yeah. And you wonder how this will play out for the rest of the world as well. Like China obviously was the leader in adding new wind capacity in 2020. Sure. And it's really expensive to live in
big cities.
Hong Kong, big city. Yeah. And so you have to wonder if this is going to put good paying jobs, hypothetically in a country like China, farther away from the cities, if that's good for everyone, because it's so hard to have enough space. I mean, you see some of these big city centers all over the world. It's just so expensive to live there and have the kind of lifestyle that you'd want. If this can sort of like be a little bit of an equalizer. And like you said, especially with the ecosystem of factories and blades being built and shipping and all that stuff, where you could see where maybe there's like a port like on the water in Texas where this sort of town that can, you could drive 2 hours inland and be at a number of wind sites. So it makes sense for you to live there, or you could hop on the boat and go out to the offshore sites, and you could be working in the shipyard or working at the blade factory, et cetera. And you could see some of these little hubs perhaps maybe getting built up because lots of different things in the same and adjacent industries are just within an hour or 2 hours drive. That could make sense.
Right. And as we get more offshore wind licenses set up, that's where the factories are going to go. That's where all the trucking is going to go. That's where all the shipping is going to go. So, and as we know, in a lot of different industries, the area of the country that sets it up first or has sort of the market capability to handle it is the one that's going to win, right? So if you're up and down the eastern seaboard of the United States and you can get set up first and get that the industry running before your next door neighbor state, you're going to be the winner in that long term. And you're already seeing that play out now where Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Rhode Island are all pushing for the same thing, essentially. And I think they all know that the first one there is going to be the leader. And that's where they want to go because of the number of jobs it's going to create, right? And long-term, and in theory, long-term jobs. Once you get an offshore wind site set up, you're talking about a 20, 30-year lifespan. That's that could pay for a lot of jobs for a long time, right? So there's a huge advantage, and sort of the stability of those jobs, I think, is a key ingredient here. Anybody that's worked in the sort of the power industry, coal, natural gas, nuclear, those can be long-term positions, right? So once you have that skill set and you want to stay in that industry, you pretty much can, right? It's not going to change all that much. It can't. It can only get bigger, essentially, or until in a nuclear case, I guess, until they decommission it. But on the wind turbines, you got a good 20-year run. And I think that's important in terms of stability. If you're starting a new family, you want to have that stability in a job, right? And I think the offshore is going to provide that to a lot of future technicians. It will.
Yeah, and of course, some of the another adjacent industry, the construction industry, like they're going to be building a lot of wind farms. And of course, some of the pushback against green energy is that, there's a lot of construction jobs, but once these farms get built, especially there's a criticism with solar, is that how many people does it take to run a solar farm? Not very many. Whereas those more in favor of gas and coal, they say it takes lots and lots of people to keep a coal operation running, or gas plant, oil plant running. So maybe valid criticism there that you don't need as many people, and so maybe it's not as many jobs long term. But I don't know that is that realistic? Is that a kind of too myopic view? I mean, what's your take on that?
No, if we're really going to play a wind turbine power for the long duration, let's say next 50 years, right? So now we're talking generational groups of technicians and employees coming through, because I think this is what's likely to happen, right? And we're starting to already see it in parts of Texas. So turbines that have been there out in the field for 15, 20 years, what are they going to do? Are they going to turn them off? They're going to leave them running, going to refurb them. There's more work, right? If they're going to refurb them, there's a bunch more work. If they want to basically take out the existing turbines and put in a larger turbine, which is also a strong possibility, there's a lot of construction jobs. So it just seems it'll move around the country as we go. But essentially, you're going to have a sort of a staggered effect of every 20 years, once a site has sort of run its useful life, and we have much more efficient turbines, which we will, and much larger turbines, we're going to retrofit. So those jobs are going to come back around. So the person that was pouring concrete out in West Texas for a pad 20 years ago is probably going to end up doing it in roughly the same place, right? It's going to circle back around. Yeah, that's huge, right? To have that sort of repeating business thing happening in terms of an economy can be very useful because of the employment effects it has.
Yeah. Plus, we can repurpose some of these sites as amusement parks and put zip lines between turbines. I mean,
my gosh,
business idea. That would be terrifying and awesome at the same time. So if anyone wants to go through that, I've gifted my idea there to you. Zip lines between decommissioned turbines.
Well, cool. I think the one thing to keep in mind in the wind turbine industry is to realize how stable it is, relatively speaking, because you have very, very large players, long-term players in
Pretty
it.
dug in, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. GE, Siemens, Gamesa, Vestas, Nordex, all these large industrial companies, they're not closing their doors tomorrow. That's not likely to happen, right? So there is that you have the ability to make a good salary and have a good place to work and live, and not necessarily worry about the next pandemic closing the place. None of the wind turbine companies, large ones, have closed through this pandemic. So it just shows some of that economic stability, which is a desirable thing in today's world. The adventurous types, sort of like we are, we're running small businesses, so we get hit with pandemics. It hurts. If you're working for a Siemens or a Gamesa, there's less chance of necessarily losing your job or the job going away altogether, as much as those companies are going to be around. And I think that's sort of an important factor to consider. If you're starting off in the wind turbine industry, it's pretty stable, relatively speaking.
Yeah, I mean, you hear of coal mines closing down, a whole town is just decimated by it, or a major factory or a major plant of whatever. That's happened throughout history. And one of my favorite movies, Slapshot, that movie was based on this hockey team was essentially going to fold because they were supported by a town that was supported completely by like one factory. I can't remember what the industry was, but
Yeah,
the factory was shuttering. Everyone was leaving. There wasn't going to be any more minor league hockey. And I think that used to be, especially 70s, 80s, 90s, a lot more prevalent than it maybe is today. But you're right. They're not closing a wind farm. And if one of these companies goes bankrupt because of the Texas freeze incident, they're just going to be bought, and those turbines are going to be spinning by a new owner. Like, they're not going anywhere.
No.
Just like foreclosing a house, like someone else is going to own it. It's not going to go away. They're just going to raise it because someone couldn't pay the bills. So, well, let's talk about lastly here. The Biden administration's initiatives here. They want to create a lot of jobs by 2035. 2030, 2035, and they're committing a lot of resources and energy into getting a lot of offshore wind. 30 gigawatts of offshore wind. So, I mean, do you feel like this is also going to have a positive effect here in the U.S.?
Possibly. I think it's so hard to predict that far out, and I don't like the one thing I don't like about the Biden administration so far is the extension of dates. To lay out a vision for 2035 seems a little extravagant, disconnected maybe. Look, if America and most European countries or any large industrial country, China, Brazil, if they really want to get something done, they can do it. And I feel like we ought to, if we want to kick this into high gear, then awesome. Let's go do it. We seem to be spending trillions of dollars in the United States right now. And if we're looking to gather that energy independence, what are we really focused on? Because I do think a lot of the infrastructure is already in place and ready to go. Right? Talk about sort of shovel-ready jobs. Wind turbine, I think, can kind of be on that pathway. It's a question of whether they have the will to do it, and how quickly the industry can support it. And I think the wind turbine industry has been really good in terms of technology improvements and looking for ways to make things go faster and easier. So I think the industry is ready. It's a question of permitting and all that other stuff, in which the federal government can have a lot of say in. If the federal government really wants to accelerate this thing, get the permitting done, and let the Siemens, GEs, Vestas go and get them out there offshore and get those wind turbines running, I think that's the part where the federal government doesn't need 15 years to make happen. They need a year, and it should be going. And I do think you could see a big shock in terms of growth of the turbine industry and turbine industry jobs if they want to flip that switch. I think that's going to be the key, is getting that permitting ready to go.
Yeah. Well, and, from the Biden administration's fact sheet, they say that meeting this target will trigger more than $12 billion in capital investment on both U.S. coasts. And, thousands of good paying jobs, more than 44,000 potentially employed in offshore wind by 2030, and nearly 33,000 they're projecting jobs will be created in communities supported by offshore wind, which we're already kind of chatting about. Those, if you want to make a nice sandwich shop in a little coastal town that's, supporting factories, and that's going to be great too, So all the workers need the stable, community life. So just like Elon Musk has invested in the small towns that his SpaceX company is working in, like those are going to be really important for making people happy and keeping those industries going. So you can't underestimate the role of those supporting communities and all those jobs as well, and the small businesses that go into it. So that's a good secondary effect. So long term, this seems like a pretty positive outlook, and it's going to be interesting to see how the wind turbine tech job evolves, because, like we said, more robotics, more automation, take a lot of the safety risks, and it's already a very safe industry. They do a great job with protecting their workers, but it's going to be much more ground-based as drones and robots take some of the arduous, difficult, up on ropes, very dangerous, at height work away. And it's going to allow people to hopefully stay in the industry for a long time, comfortably, safely, and just as long as their skill set continues to evolve and they remain kind of open-minded and ready to learn the next thing.
Yeah, there is no doubt that the technician group is going to expand over even in the next 2 years. It's going to see some pretty significant growth there. And I think as if you're high school or sort of college age, take a look at it. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Obviously, you may need some training, but that comes with a lot of jobs. So I think in terms of future potential, wind turbines is a good place to be.
Is downtime causing you financial pain and putting a stop to your power production for months on end? It's no secret, lightning strike damage is a major cause of wind turbine downtime. This damage is preventable with our easy-to-install Strike Tape lightning protection system for wind turbine blades. Our incredible engineering, build quality, materials, and edge sealants withstand up to 5 times more abuse in the toughest weather and lightning conditions. And we've got the research to prove it. If you're tired of constant downtime, we can help. Reach out to us at weatherguardwind.com and schedule a free call. We'll get your uptime back in no time.